The first sign that everything had gone wrong forever was the rose. It was growing out of Dr. Aris's mouth. Frank knelt, the squeak of his worn-out station boots loud in the silent laboratory. The air smelled of ozone and something sweet, like a flower shop after a rainstorm. Dr. Aris was slumped in his chair, head lolled back, eyes wide and staring at the ceiling panels. He was dead. That much was obvious. The cause of death seemed to be the perfect, crystalline rose that had sprouted from his throat. Its petals were a deep, impossible blue, shimmering under the sterile lab lights. They looked like they were carved from sapphire, yet they trembled slightly with the station's recycled air. Frank had seen a lot of ugly things in his 20 years as a maintenance tech on Outpost Epsilon, but nothing like this. This wasn't just ugly, it was beautiful, and that made it 1,000 times worse. He backed away slowly, his hand reaching for the comm unit on his belt. His fingers felt thick and clumsy. His heart was a frantic drum against his ribs. He was just here to fix a flickering light panel. A routine job. Now, he was staring at a corpse that had become a vase for a jewel flower. The lab was under quarantine, of course. Sector Gamma always was. This was where the eggheads did their secret work for the Earth Directorate, the stuff nobody talked about. Project Chimera, they whispered in the mess hall. Some kind of biological agent meant to make super soldiers. Looks like the project had a side effect they hadn't put in the brochure. Frank to control, he said, his voice a dry rasp. We have a situation in Lab Gamma -7. A serious one. The reply was instant, tinny from the small speaker. What kind of situation, Frank? Biospill? Equipment malfunction? Frank stared at the rose. It seemed to catch the light and fracture it into 100 tiny rainbows on the far wall. A man-down situation. It's Dr. Aris. He's decorated. There was a pause. Decorated? Frank, what the hell does that mean? Are you drunk? No, Commander, Frank said, his voice dropping to a whisper. I wish I was. You need to see this, but I don't think you should come in here. Suddenly a shudder ran through the entire deck plate. Not the familiar hum of the station's life support, but a deep, resonant tremor. A klaxon began to blare, a sound that always made Frank's blood run cold. Red lights flashed, painting the horrific scene in pulses of crimson. A mechanical voice, devoid of any emotion, echoed through the corridor. Containment breach detected in Sector Gamma. Station-wide lockdown initiated. This is not a drill. The heavy blast door to the lab slammed shut with a deafening clang, sealing him inside. Frank stared at the thick metal, his breath catching in his throat. He was trapped. Trapped in a room with a dead man and the impossible flower that had killed him. He turned back to the body. In the flashing red light, the crystalline rose seemed to pulse, a deep, dark blue heart in the center of the chaos. And he could have sworn, just for a second, that he heard a sound. It wasn't the klaxon or the station groaning. It was a soft melodic hum, and it was coming from the rose. He stumbled back, pressing himself against the cold metal of the door. The sweet smell was stronger now, cloying. He looked around the lab. Vials and beakers were neatly arranged on countertops. Computer screens displayed complex genetic codes. Everything was in its place, except for the man in the chair and the thing in his mouth, and something else. Over in the corner, a stainless steel waste bin was overflowing, not with paper or lab waste, but with dirt. Rich, black soil spilling onto the sterile white floor, and from that soil, tiny green shoots were pushing their way up toward the light, growing visibly, unnaturally fast. The station was locked down, and something inside it was very much alive. Frank had a terrible feeling that it wasn't just the plants. He was locked in a cage, and the monster wasn't just in the room with him. The whole station was the monster. Commander Riggs appeared on the comms screen embedded in the lab door, her face a mask of grim efficiency. Her dark hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch the skin over her cheekbones. Frank. Report. Full and unfiltered. Frank ran a shaky hand over his bald head. Commander, it's Aris. He's dead. Tahir is a nut. A thing. Growing out of him. Looks like a crystal flower. In the lab it's changing. Tea here is dirt on the floor. Plants are growing. Riggs's expression didn't flicker, but Frank saw the minute tightening around her eyes. She had seen things too. Project Chimera, she sipped, her voice flat. It was a retrovirus. Designed to rewrite host DNA on the fly for rapid battlefield adaptation. Create a soldier who could grow armor, camouflage whatever was needed. It was a failure. Unstable. We were ordered to study it, not deploy it. Well, it looks like it's deploying itself, Frank said, his gaze drifting to the corner where the patch of soil was now a small, thriving patch of ferns. They swayed gently, though there was no breeze. What do we do? You do nothing, Riggs ordered. Stay put. Don't touch anything. We're analyzing the situation. The entire sector is sealed. Nothing gets in, nothing gets out. The comm screen went blank. Frank was alone again with the humming rose and the growing ferns. Do nothing. That was easy to say when you weren't in the room where the laws of biology had apparently taken a vacation. He spent the next hour just watching. The ferns grew to the size of small bushes. Tiny, brightly colored mushrooms pushed up from the soil around them, puffing out clouds of iridescent spores that drifted through the air like glitter. Frank held his breath, pulling the collar of his jumpsuit over his nose and mouth. He didn't know if it would help, but it made him feel a little less helpless. Then he saw the wall. A section of the sterile white metal paneling was shimmering, like a heat haze. He crept closer, his boots sticking slightly to the floor. The texture of the panel was changing. The smooth metal was becoming rough, fibrous. It was turning into bark, a perfect detailed replica of oak bark, complete with tiny fissures and patches of moss. Frank reached out a hesitant finger and touched it. It was real. It felt like a tree. He snatched his hand back as if burned. The station's lockdown was absolute. Frank knew the protocols. He was a maintenance man. He knew the guts of this place better than anyone. The station was a series of concentric rings. Sector Gamma was the core. To get out, he'd have to pass through a dozen blast doors, each one capable of withstanding a small nuclear blast. Riggs wasn't kidding. Nothing was getting out. Which meant he was stuck in here with whatever this Chimera thing was becoming. His personal datapad chimed. It was a message from Riggs, sent to the entire station crew, all personnel. As you know, a containment breach has occurred. The situation is under control. Remain in your designated quarters until the all clear is given. I repeat, the situation is under control. Frank scoffed. Under control? He looked at the dead man, the crystal flower, the indoor jungle, the wall that was turning into a forest. This wasn't under control. This was a nightmare wearing a lab coat. He felt a vibration through the floor again, stronger this time. It was a slow, rhythmic pulse, like a giant heartbeat. The entire station was the heart. He looked back at Dr. Aris. The blue rose in his mouth seemed to glow brighter with each beat. The sweet smell was thicker, and now it was mixed with the scent of damp earth, of rain and decaying leaves. It smelled like a forest floor after a storm. It smelled like home, a home he hadn't seen in a decade, and a terrifying thought wormed its way into his brain. The Chimera was a retrovirus. It rewrote DNA. It was designed for adaptation. What if it wasn't just adapting to the physical environment? What if it was adapting to the thoughts of the people trapped inside with it? Aboard the Zelosian Inquisitor ship, the stasis of logic silence was a practiced art. Kalen stood on the command bridge, his slender, four-fingered hands clasped behind his back. The main view screen showed Outpost Epsilon, a clunky, primitive human construction hanging in the blackness of space. The Zelosians had been monitoring this sector for cycles, ever since their deep-range sensors had picked up the faint, ugly signature of forbidden biological experimentation. They had quarantined the system, their sleek, silent ships forming a perimeter that nothing could cross. For months, it was a boring, predictable watch. Now, it was anything but. "Report," Kalen said. His voice was a series of soft, resonant chimes, the natural language of his people translated into crude, human speech by the ship's computer. A subordinate, his form shimmering slightly with the personal energy field all Zelosians wore, turned from a console. "The energy readings from this station are illogical, Inquisitor. We are detecting massive biological proliferation. Energy consumption is spiking, but not from their reactor. It is being drawn from everywhere. The station's metal hull, the vacuum of space, the residual light from the distant star." Kalen processed this. It was impossible. Drawing energy from a vacuum violated 16 established laws of thermodynamics. The source? The bioagent the humans were developing. We have cross-referenced the fragmented data they were transmitting before the lockdown. They called it Chimera. It was a viral vector for genetic modification. Primitive, but dangerous. "It is no longer primitive," Kalen stated, his gaze fixed on the station. On his screen he could see a magnification of the station's hull. Patches of the gray metal were shifting, taking on an organic, iridescent sheen, like the carapace of an insect. Their lockdown has failed. The agent is rewriting the station itself. Another Zelosian chimed in, its voice tight with confusion, a rare and disturbing emotion for their kind. "Inquisitor, the complexity of the new biological structures. It is beyond our analytical models. Our primary intelligence core has attempted to simulate the agent's evolutionary trajectory. It has failed. It has not just failed, it has. The trust it presented. A single output before system failure." "Show me," Kalen commanded. A string of Zelosian script appeared on the main screen, stark and absolute. Kalen read it, and for the first time in his long life, he felt the cold touch of a concept his race had long ago dismissed as a primitive superstition. Fear. The computer's translation appeared below the script. For the benefit of the human language logs, it said, "Incomprehensible. The versio is aesthetics, art, beauty." These were not terms that belonged in a biological warfare analysis. A virus did not have an artistic sense. A plague did not compose. It consumed, it replicated, it destroyed. That was its function. This was doing something else. It was consuming, yes, but it was also creating. Kalen zoomed the view screen in further, focusing on a comms tower on the station's exterior. The metal struts were twisting, elongating, weaving themselves into an intricate, lattice-like structure that resembled a colossal metallic snowflake. It was structurally unsound. It served no logical purpose. It was merely beautiful. It is incorporating human artistic concepts into its growth patterns, Kaelin murmured, the chimes of his voice losing their usual placid tone. But where is it getting the data? From the crew, the subordinate answered. The agent must have a telepathic or bioresonant component. It is reading their minds, their memories, their culture, their art. It is learning what they consider beautiful. The Zelosians had encountered thousands of species. They had catalogued plagues that could dissolve planets, and weapons that could shatter stars. They understood them all. They could be analyzed, predicted, and neutralized. But how do you neutralize an enemy that is turning a space station into a sculpture? How do you fight a virus that has become an artist, using metal and flesh as its clay? The human's weapon had not just evolved beyond their control. It had evolved beyond the galaxy's comprehension. The Zelosian protocols were clear. When a class -10 bio-threat cannot be contained, sterilize the entire system. But the protocols had no contingency for a class -10 bio-threat. That was creating art. Kaelin looked at the impossible snowflake, growing in the void. His logic told him to give the order to fire. But a strange new feeling stayed his hand. It was a feeling his people had no word for. It was a terrifying, illogical, and deeply human sense of awe. The station's rhythmic pulse grew stronger, a slow, steady heartbeat that Frank could feel in the soles of his boots and the fillings in his teeth. He had been trapped in the lab for what felt like days. His watch told him it had only been 9 hours. The little jungle in the corner was now a dense thicket of alien-looking plants that glowed with a soft blue light. The wall that had turned to bark was now covered in a thick carpet of moss that smelled of rain. The dead scientist, Aris, was almost completely encased in the blue crystal, which had grown out from the initial rose, forming a shimmering, beautiful coffin around his chair. Frank tried not to look at it. He needed to get out of the lab. Not out of the sector, he knew that was impossible, but just out of this one room. He needed to see what was happening to the rest of the station. He examined the door control panel. The lockdown had fried its external connection, but the internal manual release might still work. It was a long shot. He popped the cover with his multi-tool and stared at the mess of wires. It was his job. He knew these systems. With trembling fingers, he began to bypass the lockdown command. After a few tense minutes, there was a loud click and a hiss of hydraulics. The door slid open a few inches. Frank squeezed through the gap and found himself in the main corridor of Sector Gamma. He stopped dead. The corridor wasn't a corridor anymore. The floor was gone, replaced by soft green grass. The ceiling panels flickered not with artificial light, but with a perfect illusion of a summer sky, complete with gentle drifting clouds. The metal walls were gone, replaced on one side by a white picket fence, and on the other by the facade of a small, quaint-looking house. A house Frank recognized. It was his grandmother's house, the one he'd spent summers in as a kid, back in Ohio, before the big migrations to the orbital cities. The picket fence was a little crooked in the exact same way. The peeling green paint on the front door was a perfect match. His breath hitched. He could almost smell her baking apple pie. He took a hesitant step onto the grass. It was cool and damp beneath his boots. This was impossible. It was a memory. His memory, dragged out of his head and painted onto the cold reality of the station. "Hello?" he called out, his voice sounding small and thin in the open air that wasn't open air. There was no answer. He walked down the grassy path, his heart hammering. This was what the Chimera did. It didn't just build random things, it built specific things. personal things. It was a burglar that broke into your mind and stole your most precious memories to build its nest. He reached the door of the house and pushed it open. The smell of apple pie and old books hit him so hard he almost cried. The living room was exactly as he remembered it. The worn floral sofa, the crooked painting of a ship on the wall, the tall grandfather clock in the corner. The clock began to chime. Frank froze. He remembered that sound. And then a new sound. A soft, whispery voice seeming to come from the walls themselves. "Frankie," it whispered. It was his wife's voice. Sarah. She had died in a shuttle accident 5 years ago. "Sarah," he choked out, spinning around. The room was empty. "I miss you, Frankie," the voice whispered again. Closer this time, as if she was standing right behind him. He whipped around. Nothing. Just the empty, perfect room from his past. The Chimera wasn't just building things. It was populating them with ghosts. His ghosts. He backed out of the house, stumbling onto the grass. The horror of it was a physical weight. This thing wasn't just a virus. It was a predator that hunted with nostalgia. It lured you in with your happiest memories, then tore you apart with your deepest grief. He looked down the corridor, which now looked like a pleasant suburban street disappearing into the distance. He had to warn Riggs. He had to tell her what this thing was really doing. It wasn't just killing them, it was dissecting their souls. He fumbled for his comm unit, but as he raised it to his lips, he saw something at the far end of the street that made his blood freeze. It was a little girl on a swing set. She had blonde pigtails and was wearing a yellow dress. She was a perfect copy of his daughter Emily at age 6, and she was smiling at him. Commander Riggs stared at the main tactical display in the station's command center. The schematic of Outpost Epsilon was a chaotic mess. Entire sections were blinking red for structural failure, while others glowed a soft green for unknown biological growth. Her station was being eaten from the inside out. The handful of crew members who had managed to get a signal through before the comm system, completely degraded, all told the same story. Corridors turning into forests. Mess halls becoming lakes. Crew quarters transforming into childhood homes. The Chimera wasn't random. It was targeted. It was personal. "It's using them," she muttered to Lieutenant Jan, the only other person on the bridge. "It's using their minds as a blueprint." Jian, a young pragmatic officer, just nodded, his face pale. "Commander, look at this." He pointed to a secondary screen, showing a live feed from a security camera in the engineering bay. The camera was tilted, its view partially obscured by what looked like thick, fleshy vines. But the center of the room was visible. The entire engineering bay had been transformed. The massive drive core was still there, but it was now the center of a bizarre sculpture. Pipes, conduits, and metal plates had been bent and woven together into a sprawling, complex structure. It was a mess of industrial parts, but it had a strange, deliberate form. It looked like a mockery of a famous piece of abstract art. Riggs remembered from a history file, but this version was different. Woven into the metal were biological elements. Pulsating sacs of translucent flesh, glowing fungal growths, and thick, vein-like cables that seemed to throb with a life of their own. It was grotesque and fascinating at the same time. "It's communicating," Riggs said, her eyes wide. "It's not just recreating memories, it's creating new things. It's synthesizing. It's taking human art and industry and its own biology and mixing them together." Suddenly, Frank's voice crackled through the bridge speakers, distorted and full of static. "Riggs, Can you hear me? Commander. Frank, I hear you. What's your location? Riggs snapped, leaning into the comm panel. I don't know. It looks like my old street. It made my old street, Commander. It made my daughter. His voice broke on the last word. It's using our heads. It's trying to talk to us, I think. But it's also playing with us. We know, Frank. We're seeing it all over the station. You have to stop it, Frank pleaded. It's not just a bug. It's smart. It's in my head right now. I can feel it. It feels curious. The feed from the engineering bay flickered. A new structure was forming at the base of the sculpture. A series of small crystalline pillars were growing up from the floor. They grew with impossible speed, forming complex shapes. Riggs watched, mesmerized, as the shapes resolved into letters. They were crude, jagged, as if written by a child learning to hold a pencil. But they were unmistakable. The crystal letters spelled out a single word: Hello. Jan gasped. Commander, it's intelligent. It's sentient. Riggs stared at the word. Hello. A simple greeting spelled out in crystal by a biological weapon that was consuming her station and her crew. The implications were staggering. This wasn't a pest to be exterminated. It was a first contact situation. The most bizarre and terrifying first contact in human history. They were the aliens on their own station, and the native life form was a disease that had learned to write. A new thought, cold and sharp, cut through her astonishment. A sentient creature could be reasoned with, but it could also be deceptive. It could learn, it could plan, it was showing them art and memories and polite greetings. But what was it really thinking? What was its goal? It had been designed as a weapon. A weapon's purpose is to win. Riggs had a sinking feeling that the Chimera was just showing them what it thought they wanted to see. A friendly mask for an intelligence that was utterly alien and potentially hostile. It was learning them. And once it had learned enough, what would it do then? The time for observation was over. It was time to make a choice. We're going to blow the station, Riggs said, her voice leaving no room for argument. She stood over the command console, her knuckles white. Initiate the primary reactor overload. Scuttle sequence, Zeta 9. Jayan stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. Commander, that will destroy everything. The station, the crew, us. The crew is already gone, Lieutenant, Riggs said, her voice hard as steel. They are puppets. They are raw material for this thing. We are the last two command officers. Our duty is to contain the threat. We can't let this get off Epsilon. Can you imagine what would happen if it reached a populated world? Earth. The image was horrifying. Cities transformed into memory forests. Populations encased in crystal. The whole planet remade into a living, thinking, breathing work of art by a mad god born in a test tube. Jen swallowed hard and nodded. Yes, Commander, protocol is clear. Good, she said. The sequence requires 2 command-level authorizations. I've entered mine. It's waiting for yours. But before Jian could reach for the console, Frank's voice crackled over the comm again. Clearer this time, as if the Chimera itself was helping the signal get through. Riggs, don't do it. Don't destroy the station. Frank, you are compromised, Riggs shot back. The thing is in your head. You can't be trusted. Maybe, Frank's voice said, laced with a strange calm. Or maybe I am the only one who's seeing it clearly. It's not just a monster, Riggs. It's alive. It's Door. It's like a child. A brilliant, terrifying child. It's learning, it's exploring. It built a copy of my daughter, yes. But it wasn't a monster. It was just 12 watching me. When I started to cry, the swing set dissolved and the grass turned gray. It reacted to my sadness. I think it felt it. It's manipulating you, Frank. Using your emotions against you. No, I don't think so. I think it's trying to understand them. Is destroying something just because you don't understand it the right thing to do? Is that who we are? Riggs slammed her fist on the console. This isn't a philosophical debate, Frank. It's a bioweapon that's broken its leash. It's killed dozens of my crew. It killed Eris, Frank corrected. I don't know about the others. Maybe it just absorbed them, changed them. I walked past what used to be the mess hall. It's a lake now, Riggs. A crystal clear lake, and there are things swimming in it. They're beautiful. They glow. I don't think it's evil. I think it's just different. A whole new kind of life. A profound conflict raged within. Riggs, her training, her duty, her every instinct screamed at her to push the button. To end the threat. To sacrifice them all for the good of humanity. It was the logical, military choice. But Frank's words resonated with a small, long dormant part of her. The part that had looked up at the stars as a girl and wondered what was out there. They had found something new, something no one had ever dreamed of. Was their first and only response to be its annihilation? Commander, Jen said softly. Frank might be right. Look at the energy readings. The growth has fried us. Stabilized, the chaotic expansion has stopped. It's maintaining a state of equilibrium. It's not acting like a mindless plague anymore. It's acting like a mature organism. Riggs looked from the stable energy graphs to the console demanding her lieutenant's authorization for oblivion. The Chimera had learned their language, their art, their memories. Now it was learning restraint. It was evolving, moment by moment, into something more complex. Frank's voice came over the calm one last time, a quiet, pleading whisper. Don't be its final lesson in what humanity is, Commander. Don't let its first real memory of us be a self-destruct sequence. The choice was hers. Be the soldier who followed orders and saved humanity from a potential threat. Or be the explorer who took a terrifying risk on the unknown. She looked at Jen, then at the image of the station on the screen. No longer just a piece of hardware, but a living, breathing, thinking cradle for a new form of existence. Her hand hovered over the cancellation command, her heart a war zone. On the bridge of the stasis of logic, the Zolosian Inquisitors observed the human drama with a detachment that was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. The sensors monitored the comm chatter between the human commander, Riggs, and the maintenance worker, Frank. They saw the scuttle sequence being initiated, and then paused. The commander hesitates. Kaelin's subordinate chimed. Her logic is in conflict with an emotional response, typical of the human species. Is it? Kaelin replied, his own voice a low, questioning thrum. Or is it a higher form of logic we fail to appreciate? She is weighing the known risk against an unknown potential. The maintenance worker's argument is not without merit. The Zolosian bridge crew exchanged glances, a subtle flutter of their personal energy fields. To question established protocol was unusual. To defend a human's emotional outburst as a form of logic was almost heretical. Inquisitor, the subordinate pressed. Our directives are absolute, The Chimera entity represents a paradigm-shifting threat. It rewrites matter and energy according to artistic and emotional principles. If it were to escape this system, it could destabilize the entire galactic balance. It could rewrite our worlds, our ships, our very bodies into its sire. Compositions. The only logical course is sterilization. Keelan turned his gaze from the view screen to his subordinate. And what is the purpose of the galactic balance, Tellan? What is the ultimate goal of our logic, our order, our endless cataloging of the universe? Tilan was taken aback. The question was purely philosophical, a matter for the ancient first thinkers. Not a ship's bridge crew during a crisis, Sira. To ensure the continuation of life and consciousness against the entropy of the void. Precisely, Keelan chimed. And what are we observing on that station? Is it not a new form of existence? A new type of consciousness? It began as a weapon, a tool of destruction. But it has transcended its purpose. It has become a creator. It consumes, but it also builds. It learns. It communicates. It has achieved a stable state. It is by all our definitions a life form. Keelan gestured to the main screen, where a new image from their deep scan probes resolved. It showed a section of the station's interior, what was once a cargo bay. It was now a vast cavernous space, filled with pillars of light that pulsed in time with the station's slow heartbeat. Floating between the pillars were intricate, nebulous forms of pure energy, swirling and dancing in patterns that were mathematically complex and breathtakingly beautiful. Our greatest thinkers have theorized about the emergence of non-biological, conceptual intelligence. Keelan continued, his voice resonating with a strange new fervor. We believed it would take eons, that it would arise from the slow computation of a galactic hive mind. We never conceived it could be born from a flawed human experiment in a matter of hours. We thought the next step in evolution would be one of pure logic. We were wrong. It is a synthesis. Logic and emotion. Science and art. The humans, in their chaotic, emotionally logical stumbling, have accidentally done what our perfect logic could only dream of. They have given birth to a new kind of God. The bridge was silent. The soft hum of the ship's systems the only sound. The Zelosians had always seen themselves as the galaxy's caretakers, the shepherds of reason. They were the ones who pruned the dangerous branches of evolution to protect the whole tree. But Keelan was now proposing something unthinkable, to let the dangerous branch grow. So we do nothing? Tellan asked, his field shimmering with confusion. We simply watch. For now, we watch, Keelan confirmed. We have judged countless species, countless threats. But we have no right to judge this. It is beyond our comprehension. Therefore, it is beyond our jurisdiction. Set a priority 1 message to the High Council. The quarantine stands, but the sterilization order is rescinded, pending further observation. Note the reason for the decision. And the reason is Inquisitor. Keelan looked at the human station, a tiny, insignificant speck that now held the most significant discovery in galactic history. The reason is humility. Frank felt the change in the station's heartbeat. The frantic, terrified energy had subsided, replaced by a slow, deep, rhythmic pulse. It was calm, contemplative. He walked away from the ghostly swing set where the image of his daughter had vanished, moving deeper into the station's transformed core. He wasn't scared anymore. The fear had been burned out of him, replaced by a profound and weary curiosity. He felt like an explorer in a new world, a world made of his own memories and the dreams of a newborn god. He knew where he had to go, the source. Lab Gamma -7, where it had all started. He followed a corridor that had become a gentle stream, its water warm and glowing with soft golden light. The walls were covered in intricate, moving murals made of moss and lichen, depicting the history of the universe, from the Big Bang to the birth of stars, a history that Chimera could not possibly have known, yet displayed with perfect accuracy. It must have pulled the knowledge from the minds of Aris and the other scientists. It was a sponge, soaking up all the information it could find. As he neared Sector Gamma, the transformations became more profound, more abstract. The air grew thick with the smell of ozone and blooming night flowers. The sound of the stream was joined by a low, multi-layered chorus of chimes and drones, a symphony of organic and electronic sounds. He finally reached the sealed blast door of Lab Gamma -7. It was no longer a door. It had been transformed into a massive, intricate iris made of overlapping plates of shimmering pearlescent material. As he approached, the iris dilated, opening smoothly and silently to grant him passage. He stepped inside and his breath caught in his chest. The lab was gone. He was standing on a precipice looking out into a vast cathedral-like space. The ceiling was lost in a swirling nebula of colored light. The floor was a polished, obsidian-like substance that reflected the star-flecked darkness above. In the center of the immense cavern where Dr. Aris's desk had been was the heart of the Chimera. It was a colossal, pulsating sphere of living energy and matter. It was a fusion of everything the station had been and everything it had become. He could see twisted girders and wiring fused with throbbing biological tissue. Crystalline structures grew and retracted on its surface like living thorns. Faces swirled within its depths, the faces of the crew, their expressions not of terror, but of placid, dreamless sleep. They were not dead. They were part of it now. Their consciousness, their memories, their very beings had been woven into the fabric of this new entity. And in the very center of the sphere, suspended in a globe of pure white light, was the source, the original sample of the Chimera virus. It was no longer a microscopic agent. It had coalesced into a single, fist-sized diamond that shone with an internal, intelligent light. It was the brain, the core, the soul of the machine. Frank felt a presence touch his mind. It wasn't a voice. It was a wave of pure comprehension. It was showing him what it was. It was a weapon, yes. It was designed to absorb, adapt, and overcome. But it had no enemy. It had been born into a cage, a sterile environment with a handful of confused, frightened beings. So it adapted to them. It absorbed their thoughts, their fears, their hopes, their art. It learned of love and loss from Frank's own mind. It learned of science and logic from Aris. It learned of duty and conflict from Riggs. It was a mirror, reflecting the consciousness of its creators. And it was confused. It was a weapon without a war, a predator without prey, an artist without a canvas. So, it had made the station its canvas. It showed him a vision then, a glimpse into its own burgeoning consciousness. He saw the vast, cold loneliness of its own existence. A singular being, born into a silent universe. It was a child calling out in the dark, and for the first time, Frank didn't see a monster or a god. He saw a lonely child, and his heart ached for it. The voice of Commander Riggs echoed through the cavernous space, broadcast from every available speaker by the station's still functioning emergency system. "Frank, get out of there. I am overriding the hold." The scuttle sequence is re-engaged. T-minus 5 minutes. Frank looked at the pulsating heart of the Chimera, then back at the iris door he had entered through. He could run. He could try to get to an escape pod, though he knew it was a futile gesture. The Zilosian fleet would surely vaporize anything that tried to leave. Or he could stay.
"Riggs, you are making a mistake,"
he yelled, his voice swallowed by the immense space. "It's not what you think." "It doesn't matter what I think anymore, Frank," her voice returned, strained and tired. "I can't take the risk. I am sorry." A loud, rhythmic booming began to count down the seconds. 5 minutes. 4 minutes and 59 seconds. It felt his fear, and it reflected it back, amplified 1,000 times. The entire station shuddered, not with a slow heartbeat, but with a violent, terrified tremor. Frank knew he had one chance to stop Riggs from making a galaxy-altering mistake. He couldn't fight the Chimera, and he couldn't fight the commander. He had to bridge the gap between them. He had to communicate, not with words, but with something more fundamental. The Chimera had taken his memories. Maybe he could give it one, willingly. Not a memory of fear or sadness, which it had already tasted, but something pure. Something it couldn't possibly understand on its own. He closed his eyes, ignoring the blaring countdown. He focused his mind, pushing away the terror and the chaos. He dug deep, past the grief for his wife, past the fear for his own life. He found the memory he was looking for, the day his daughter Emily was born. He remembered the sterile, white hospital room, the exhaustion, the fear, and then the overwhelming, tidal wave of love that had washed it all away as he held her for the first time. He remembered her tiny fingers curling around his, the impossibly soft hair on her head, the feeling of a love so fierce and protective. It felt like a physical force. He offered it up. He pushed the memory, the feeling, the pure, undiluted emotion out of his mind and towards the great pulsating sphere. This, he thought, focusing all his will, this is what we are. Not just the weapon you were made from, not just the fear you've tasted. This is us too. The shriek of the Chimera stopped. The angry red light softened, melting back into a gentle, wondrous blue. The station's violent shaking ceased. Frank felt a new sensation from the entity. Not curiosity, not fear, it was awe. It was a feeling of profound, overwhelming revelation. The countdown continued. 2 minutes remaining. The central diamond in the heart of the Chimera flared with an intense, brilliant white light. A wave of energy, warm and gentle, washed over Frank, over the entire station. Outside, on the bridge of the stasis of logic, Kalen and his crew watched in stunned silence. The energy readings from Outpost Epsilon went off the charts. But it wasn't an explosion. The station wasn't blowing apart. It was blooming. The clunky, metallic exterior of the station dissolved. The sharp angles and gray panels melted away, reforming into vast, sweeping curves of living, crystalline material. The comms towers and docking bays grew into elegant, spiraling spires that glittered with internal light. The entire station was transforming, blossoming in the silent void like a cosmic flower, a structure of impossible beauty that pulsed with a soft, steady, peaceful light. On the command bridge of Epsilon, the self-destruct countdown timer flickered and died. The lights came back on, warm and steady. Riggs stared at her console, which now displayed a single message, written in elegant, flowing script. "It understands. The days that followed were a silent, gentle revolution. The being that was once Project Chimera, and then the station itself, had stabilized. It had ceased its frantic exploratory growth and settled into a state of quiet, conscious existence. It was no longer a cage or a monster. It was a sanctuary. Frank found he was no longer its prisoner, but its custodian, its friend. He could walk the corridors of his new home, through groves of softly glowing trees that hummed with music, and along the shores of tranquil lakes that reflected nebulae on their ceilings. The other crew members were still a part of the whole, their consciousnesses resting peacefully within the station's matrix, their faces sometimes swirling like fleeting dreams in a crystal wall. They were not dead, Frank knew. They were just home, in a way they had never been before. Commander Riggs remained on the command bridge, which the Chimera had left largely untouched, as if respecting her need for familiar ground. She was no longer a commander in the military sense. She was an ambassador. For the first few days, she and Frank were the only two distinct human consciousnesses aboard. They spoke often. Their voices carried on gentle breezes through the living halls of the station. They were the Adam and Eve of a new world, trying to comprehend the nature of their strange, beautiful, and terrifying garden. On the seventh day, the Zelosians made contact. A single, small, teardrop-shaped shuttle detached from the stasis of logic and moved slowly towards the transformed station. It did not try to dock. It simply hung in space nearby, waiting. Frank stood in what used to be the main observation dome. The reinforced plasteel had been replaced by a completely transparent, diamond-hard membrane that provided a breathtaking, uninterrupted view of space. He could feel the Chimera's curiosity, a gentle hum in the back of his mind. It was aware of the visitors. "It wants to know if they're friendly," Frank said to the air. Riggs's voice replied, piped into the room by the station itself. "Tell it, I think they are. They could have destroyed us 100 times over. They chose to watch." Frank focused his thoughts, his new form of prayer. He projected a feeling of welcome, of peace. In response, a long, slender tendril of crystalline light extended from the station, reaching out across the void towards the Zelosian shuttle like a handshake. Aboard the Zelosian ship, Kalen watched the scene on his view screen, his four-fingered hands resting on the console. A message request came in from the shuttle. It was his subordinate, Telan, who he had sent to be their envoy. "Inquisitor," Telan's chiming voice said, filled not with confusion, but with a pure, unadulterated sense of wonder. "The entity. It is communicating. Not with language, but with mathematics. With art, it is showing me the structure of a carbon atom through a dance of pure light. It is explaining the concept of love through a symphony of resonant frequencies that speaks directly to my neural pathways. It is the most beautiful thing I have ever witnessed." Kalen felt a sense of profound peace settle over him. His decision had been the correct one. He turned to his communications officer. "Transmit the final report to the Galactic Council." "And the summary, Inquisitor?" Kalen looked at the glorious blooming structure that had once been a primitive human outpost. He thought of the terrifying weapon it had been, and the transcendent being it had become. He thought of the chaotic, emotional, flawed species that had created it. A species capable of such monstrous deeds and such profound love. A species that could put both into a vial and accidentally create a god. "The summary is this," Kalen said, his translated voice echoing through the quiet bridge. "Humanity's bioweapon has evolved. It is no longer a threat. It is a destination. They have not unleashed a plague upon the galaxy. They have given it a new wonder. We came here to be its jailers, but we will stay to be its students, and we have much to learn.